Chapter 23. As she led me down the brick-walled corridor toward the hidden room, my heart beat harder with every step. Not because I dreaded visiting the room, but because I longed to. Images of the space crept into my mind at random times, like captures in my interface. But I suspected the contents were the real source of the strange allure. The beating anticipation dwindled when she swung the door open and we stepped inside. The desk was gone. The tomes, gone. The warm sensation, gone. The panels on both sides stood wide open, devoid of contents. Roshan stepped in after me, then closed the door, which slammed with a thud. The only remaining furnishings were the bookstand and the chair that once sat behind the desk. Roshan gestured toward it. "Sit, Tess." It wasn't like I had a choice, so I complied. She leaned against the door. "When I first visited this place, I was overcome by a chill I hadn't sensed in ages. As young magicians studying the light, you students might have sensed it. Because of the way my master taught me, I matured in the light well ahead of my level, and the chills turned to little pinpricks on my skin. Solara's warnings change as we grow. Do you understand?" I nodded. "I think so." She shoved off the door with the heel of one boot, then paced to the hole I'd broken in the panel on one wall. She chipped away at the splintered wood, dropping flecks to the floor. "Did you sense the chill when you first came here with your friends?" "I don't know if I'd call them friends." Roshan wheeled around. "I also have a keen sense of avoidance, Tess. I have not struggled to become a priestess of the light and vanquish evil you couldn't imagine from this continent so I could stand in this dark place and mince words with you. Now, answer." My head jerked back with her admonition. I hadn't answered directly because I'd sensed just the opposite when I'd entered the room. It'd been warm, inviting. Now I realized the presence of the dark materials had been the source of that warmth. No doubt lingered. The priestess made clear the night before that she'd sensed my shadow affinity. I sighed, then my shoulders dropped. "No, I sensed no chill when I came here, but I sense one now." Roshan nodded and pinched her lips together like one who'd already known the answer. "Your low affinity for the light is not something to be ashamed of, and it can grow with practice. Do you understand this?" Again I nodded, although my grasp was limited. After all, this was the second day of classes, and I still felt like I'd just stepped off the farm. But then my thoughts turned to how she hadn't mentioned my shadow affinity. She accepted that I'd chosen the school of light magic, and that was that. Perhaps I shouldn't have been surprised. She was, after all, steeped in the light. "Was it you who found the secret cubbies in this room?" This time I didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Why were you here?" "I thought you knew about my so-called friends." She nodded. "But not why you were here. The boys brought me here to lock me in. They'd been here before. Maybe they wanted to share the disturbing chill they'd sensed with me out of some sick idea of indoctrination. I don't know." "The motivations of others are often shrouded from us. Get used to it and you won't be surprised." She paced away from the wall. "I brought Magister Lyra and a few masters here to clear out the texts. 2 had been here before, but they hadn't discovered the hidden panels. I wonder why you did, but the masters hadn't." Because I was trapped in here and had nothing better to do than search for a way out? It came out like a question, but the words rang true. "Yes, I suppose that's possible." Possible. Forgive me, Master Roshan, but why does it seem like you suspect me of something? "You didn't tell me about the tomes. I discovered a gash in that panel." She threw out a finger for emphasis, and the poisonous quills lodged deep into the opposite wall were an added clue. "So you tell me, of what might I suspect you?" I shook my head, although I knew the answer well enough. She didn't provide one. "Were you able to read any of it?" Oh, now it was certainly time to lie. "No. The texts were in runes I didn't understand." My mind window had something to say about that. Now that's a doozy. The goddess penalizes you 10 light points. Current disposition, neutral. Current rank, light, -20 out of -250. Next threshold, untrusted. "And how do you know they were runes? What knows a farm girl of runes?" "They adorned my father's armor. Not that I knew it was armor. Panels hung on our walls like artwork. Only the day we were attacked did I discover its true purpose. He called the metal to him, then the plates formed around him. I'd spent years admiring the symbols on our wall, though I didn't know they were runes. When I drew them on my staff at Fowler Foundation, they gave my staff powers. So, you gained rune skill points, which means some runes are decipherable, right? She had me, and I knew it. Yes, I can read some runes. The truth at last. I'll ask you again. Did you read any of the tomes stored here? I shook my head. There was no other solution. I'd left the tomes I couldn't decipher in that room and smuggled the ones I could partially read to the cave. If I told her I could read any, she would ask which ones. Then I'd be trapped because if other masters scoured the text they'd moved out of here, Roshan would compare notes and learn the topic I claimed to have read didn't exist in them. They might not discover my deception that day or the next, but when they did find out, they'd know I'd kept some of the materials for myself. And then my plan to power up over time so I could survive and someday avenge my father would be burned. In short, it didn't matter if I wanted to come clean or not because my original plan was the higher priority. Perhaps the guilt washing over me like a cold bath sufficed so I didn't receive another light point penalty for the same lie. Perhaps the goddess was reasonable. It was possible she even supported my desire to advance myself.
It's a fine plan.
The unexpected voice in its low, droll tone caught me by surprise, so my head swiveled toward Roshan. She set hands on her hips. Tess? I couldn't read any of the tomes you found, okay? I blurted. Interesting word choice. The tomes I found. Were there others? A vulgar word passed through my mind. I'd gone and given up the truth anyway. Maybe deception wasn't my strong suit, but my response showed frustration was. I found some other materials and I hid them away. The goddess smiles about your honesty with her faithful servant. You have gained 5 light points. Current disposition, neutral. Current rank, light, -5 out of -250. Next threshold, untrusted. I expected to be admonished again, but Roshan surprised me by sitting at my feet and pulling her ankles high to cross her legs. So, you were able to read some. This conclusion had come so fast, I knew I'd underestimated the priestess. I needed to stop doing that. I let out another sigh. Yes, but only in bits and pieces. It's not like I learned a bunch of shadow magic from them. Roshan adopted a mellow tone. The being who used to occupy this place was a vampire. Vampire? Like the suckers of life force my father told me about? Roshan continued. He was called Worcester because of his ability to seek out magic users by the strength of their essences. Rubal has a dark history of magic suppression, and atrocities I wouldn't repeat have been visited on people like us for ages because of this dark man's, if you can call such an undead creature a man, doings. So the man who wrote notes in the margins was a vampire? If you possess any of his materials, it is imperative you lead me to them. Pictures scrolled through my mind. The cave, the huge rock troll who was unlike any troll I'd ever heard of, the wolf, our battle which nearly killed me, and how the troll had come to my rescue. After all, that's what it had been. He hadn't pursued me when I ran, and telling Roshan about my savior, despite what my savior was, seemed a betrayal of the lowest order. They are lost to us, Master Roshan. Roshan stood, then dusted off the back of her robe. Your conduct does not become the tradition we are trying to build here, Contessa of Milbury. If you would spirit away such dark documents for your own keeping, then you cannot be trusted. But I can't prove, even to myself, this was your intent. No, I'd say she drove that hammer pretty accurately. Perhaps you have other reasons for your decision not to be forthcoming, but you've done little to gain my trust or the benefit of the doubt. She threw the door open. We have shadow students who could become susceptible to Holcroft's dark designs if they were to fall upon these materials without the proper resistance training. Magic requires balance. If such dark fortunes come to pass, you will be the one I seek for recompense. Instead of considering how others might be affected, a dark moment of narcissism swept over me when I wondered if what the priestess said meant I was susceptible to dark callings. By all accounts, my shadow affinity was very high. An image of the ember-eyed dark demon standing in the field gazing up at my dorm room window flashed. and the sudden realization I might be in over my head had me up from my chair and following Roshan into the hallway with the intent of coming clean. But then she spoke over her shoulder. "You will return all the materials in 2 days' time, or you will be expelled from Roarington Academy. If you cannot return them, then you can tell Magister Lyra where they are, and we will retrieve them." Maybe it was a testament to my own perseverance that I saw her words as a gift of time, because after she'd spoken them, I changed my footing. I curled my lips inward and followed her to the ladder in silence. After we reached the top, Roshan slammed the grate shut. Then she focused her hard gaze upon me a final time. 2 days, Tess. If it wasn't for the potential danger of the tomes and Master Lyra's determination to see them in the proper hands, I wouldn't be able to give you that much time. And who has the proper hands? I asked, surprising myself. These are things that don't concern students. She held up a pair of fingers. 2 days, Contessa. Despite the threat of being cast out of the academy, I showed up for work at Luli's place. A line of patrons stretched halfway across the road, but only a few people wore protective clothing or caster's robes. It seemed Flavor sold the roles as well. She smiled grandly as I approached. "Oh, Tess, thank goodness. I'm getting low on stocks, and we might have to start selling fresh instead of leaving them to sit for a day. Hustle up now." "Sure." I slipped under the table, then shuffled down the hallway and into the kitchen. Luli's place was already becoming a safe haven. My mind slipped into my work, and as I gained a few cooking skill points, I focused even harder on making every roll perfect. I'd gain the apprentice rank, and soon I would be halfway to adept. "Your cooking skill has reached rank 14. When I spun off the lid of a jar of fruit I hadn't wrapped before, its scent struck a note of familiarity. The rock troll was eating this. I peeled, then rolled the fruit, an idea forming in my head. So hard was I concentrating, I never heard the typical footfalls and squeak of a loose floorboard in the hallways before Luli appeared at the end of business. "Well, you really achieved tonight, young lady." "Thanks. I like this work." "I'm glad, because the way business is now, I don't think I'll survive without you." She pulled up a chair, then grabbed a rag to wipe her hands. "Maybe someday you'll be able to hire me for longer hours." She pulled the rag up the length of one finger, then dropped it in her lap. "Why would you want more hours? Won't you have to spend many practicing magic at the academy?" "I've been reconsidering my time at the academy." Luli cocked her head, her eyebrows knit together, then an eye twitched. She tossed the rag on the table. "Okay, Tess." She raised both hands and flicked all the fingers toward herself as if beckoning me. "Out with it. What's happening?" Was I so easy to read? For someone who practiced deception for high purpose, I needed practice.
Trust no one.
It would have seemed strange to tell my father's voice to shut up out loud, but I sent it away nonetheless. "There are people at the academy who intend ill toward me." "Like the one you had to punch in the nose." I nodded. "Today, his friend threw an axe on the backswing and nearly hit me. He claimed it was a mistake, but he and the one I punched locked me into a secret room the other day, and I don't trust them." "Secret room? What in the world do you all get up to over there?" "I don't want to get up to anything," the words burst out of my mouth. "People are just so complicated. I've lived on a farm all my life. I'm not used to being around people. I don't know how to handle it." Irritation flooded me as tears spilled over. I swiped them away. I don't know who to trust. Hell, I don't know if I can trust anyone. I trusted Shabana, and she betrayed me without a second thought. But then she apologized, and now she'll claim she'll watch my back. But how do I know she's being truthful when we've been friends all of 3 days? Another tear spilled over, and my throat quivered. Luli reached across the table for my hand. Her grip was strong, reassuring, but her words were not. "And what? You're going to let them have the better of you?" "Huh?" "Well, the whole point of going there is to learn magic from people suited to teach it to you, right? This is something you want, to learn magic?" "I don't know what I want anymore." "Would you like to know what I do when I feel that way?" I nodded as I wiped away another hot tear. "I think about what I wanted yesterday. If it's the same desire I wanted the day before, I stick with it. This way I can trust my judgment instead of my emotions." I scrunched up my lips as her meaning took hold. "The day before, I was living peacefully on a farm with my father. And now you're here. Let's try this again." She propped her elbows on the table between jars of fruit and leaned in. Allowing others to determine your fate is a recipe for unhappiness. People will bully. People will disagree with you. The ignorant will call you stupid. I had the suspicion Luli might not have been talking about me at all. But if you give them power, they will take it. Never let your guard down. Don't give them power. Trust no one, in other words? She shook her head. It's like you said. You've only been among people for a few days, and you can't let such a short period in their company define your future. You told me the other day you were saved from a snowy grave by a Michonne woman, right? How did she treat you? Destiny was wonderful. They all were. Then you see, most people are decent. Don't let a couple of brutes get in your way. She slapped the table. But look at me. I sell fruit from a plank of wood in front of my home. What do I know? I rounded the table and threw my arms around Luli. She grasped my shoulder with one hand and squeezed as she leaned into the hug from her seat. Just one more piece of advice. I released her. Okay. You've already given one man a good punch in the nose. Take your victories where you can, but don't seek out trouble. Turn away from their temptation until they give you no choice. She stood, grabbed both my shoulders, then pulled me close to gaze into my eyes. But when they take your choices away, punch them harder and harder until they learn. Because what you've told me means they haven't learned their lessons. She grasped one of my hands. If you want to work for me, Tess, I'll welcome you because I see the strength of your spirit, and you've shown up here despite the pains you've endured at the academy. But it's not what I want for you. Your gift is one I can't imagine. Use it. Empower yourself, and let no one stand in your way. New tears welled in both eyes. I nodded. One more thing, sweets. You can trust the priestess, Roshan. She's a constant customer, and she runs a gem shop in town if you want to meet her away from watchful eyes. It's on the same road as the temple, about a 3-minute walk south on the left. If she doesn't expel me first? Roshan? It was then I decided that if I'd trust someone, it'd be Luli. She'd been nothing but nice to me. Supportive, ready with solid advice. I leveled with her about the tomes, the scrolls, the conflicts, the demon who killed my father then reappeared in the field outside my dorm. Wow, you really have seen strange days. She folded her arms across her chest and leaned against a hutch. What will you do? I don't know. If I give up the tomes and scrolls, I'll never see them again, and I'll have to grow slowly like the rest of the students. Would that be so bad? If Roshan says shadow students are more susceptible. Right, good to know, but I have demons chasing me. I see your point. She unfolded one arm and scratched her cheek. So, I repeat, what will you do? I shrugged. Luli rolled her eyes. Tess. She snapped her fingers twice. Wake up! My eyes shot wide open at the sudden outburst. She lowered her voice, but her tone remained firm. What are your choices? To give back the tomes or be expelled and teach myself. And if you decide on the second option, how will you get past the troll? I eyed the rolls of orange fruit I jarred and a few still sitting on the table. Would you mind if I took a few of the passion fruit rolls with me? Of course not. Whether I decided to teach myself or not, the fruit rolls might serve a purpose, but I still needed to decide. The academy should have been a respite from the world outside its halls. I'd run into bad luck and bad people, but Luli was right. I needed to stand up for myself, and if I lost the battle there, I would win the war elsewhere. I was tired, and I had 2 days to decide. The fact Roshan had given me any time spoke to both her patience and the value the academy put on the materials I held. I'd consider carefully before deciding. You have a third option. Luli's words dragged me from my inner narrative. You said there are scrolls that will increase your attributes, right? I nodded. So return the tomes and use the scrolls to advance yourself. She double-cocked an eyebrow as if we shared a conspiracy. If you're the one who benefits, and that ensures they don't fall into the wrong hands, and if these things actually belong to someone who is now dead, you're neither stealing nor putting others at risk. That's how I see it. The weight of her meaning unfolded slowly, but when it did, excitement surged. I thanked her, then she walked me to the door. A man stood near the empty plank of wood she'd yet to rinse. He was husky with strong shoulders and defined biceps. You again? Luli asked. You don't give up so easily.
Oh, come on, Luli. Maybe we can grab a bite.
His gaze flicked to me, then back to her.
Hey, who's the cute one?
Luli cocked her chin at me. Tess, meet Benson. I subtly winked my eyes when I nodded in greeting. Benson, human, level 39, Tanner, disposition, neutral. He's one of the ones we have to watch out for. He gets what he wants, then doesn't come back until he's in need again.
Harsh,
Benson said.
I thought you liked your independence.
Luli chuckled. You've already used that one, Benson. She shooed me away with one lazy hand gesture. I have a battle to fight with this one, Tess. Get on back to the dorm. She turned an eye on Benson. Or maybe a strapping man like you could escort the young lady. I'll be fine, I interjected. Benson cocked his chin toward me.
Then I'll keep an eye on you from here.
Thanks. Nice to meet you.
I and you,
he said.
Now, Luli.
Their voices trailed off as I walked up the main thoroughfare. A few stragglers from the day's trading milled about. Some crossed the road, others passed me. I took in haggard faces, youthful gazes, skins of varying color ranging from milky white to beautiful umber. Warmth welled in the center of my chest, then radiated out in all directions. My gaze was drawn to a side street. What I saw there made my heart thump in my throat. A robed figure lurked in the shadows. As soon as he saw me pass, he stepped forward into the moonlight. It's him. The man I'd seen in the library, then with Magister Lyra. Heat surged through my body despite my every inclination to flee. If what Roshan said was true, that Lightcaster sensed a chill in the presence of strong shadow forces, and that untrained shadow magicians were susceptible to beings with power and dark intent, then the inviting warmth should be taken as a signal I should flee. Although I didn't break into a run, I lurched into long strides and kept my head low to ignore the few passerby so I could focus on the sounds of footfalls behind me. If I needed to break into a run before I reached the university guards, I would. You're being ridiculous. He is a master at the academy. But if he had no ill intent, why not just catch me at the academy? What could he possibly want in the dark of night on an unpopulated thoroughfare?
Contessa!
A grumbling voice called from behind. From here, I could see the gates leading toward the academy's main entrance, but I was still too far off to see the guards in the darkness. I slipped the staff off my back as I lengthened my strides.
Contessa, I mean you no harm. Please stop. Roshan sent me.
Roshan? Against the pleading of my mind and warning beats of my rapidly thumping heart, I stopped and wheeled, holding my staff across my body in a defensive position. The man lowered his hood, then nodded.
Greetings, Contessa. I am Master Drasen Welling of the Shadow Council.